everybody. I'm Scotty J. You're watching Rock Titan TV. We have with us a legend right now, a man whose style defined the standard for guitar virtuosos worldwide. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Mr. Steve Hackett.
Hi there.
How are you, sir?
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, and after a few takes, I finally got it right.
Yeah, but I'm going to show you all my outtakes, right? So you're going to see how that goes.
There you go. There you go. Now, I was just going through kind of my warm-up exercise, getting into this.
Yeah.
And, you were telling me about your warm-up exercises before you hit the stage back in the day.
Well, back in the day, I used to do tons of push-ups before I went on. I used to do 200 push-ups sometimes, particularly with acoustic shows, just to literally warm up. And sometimes my hands would be so cold. But, I think that a lot of that is to do with if you've got the confidence in knowing that you can do it even on a bad night, that there's something that once technique gets to a certain point and you realize that it's not worth worrying about all that stuff. You've got to get up there and enjoy it. And years ago, I remember Phil Collins telling me about that, saying you've got to learn to enjoy your work more. I used to fret away, but enjoying it is the big deal. If you're on stage and you are literally smiling inside, the audience get that. And
right.
It's about that. It isn't actually about getting the notes right. It's about what do you get out of it yourself. And I always tell people, if they're learning guitar and they say, "Oh, I'm not as good as you," and I say, "Yeah, but it's what do you get out of it yourself? That's the main thing. Out of 3 chords, you can get pure joy. That's it. That's all you need."
Yeah, right. Coming from you in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Well, yeah, a million notes later, but it's the joy of it when you're a kid and you've just got those 3 chords together. You think, I can play a whole ton of tunes here.
Well, it's funny because you're mentioning your style and just a few chords here, but obviously there are some very particular things that you in particular are noted for. And, I have to wonder if you got them patented or trademarked, because if you could do that, with the tapping and the sweep picking and, everything that you're known for now.
That's funny. That's funny. There's one guitar solo from 1973 from the album Selling England by the Pound. And it's the opening track, which is Dancing with the Moonlit Night.
Right.
And that one solo combines a number of those tricks. It's got tapping, it's got sweep picking, it's got octave jumps as well, and there's so many different ways to do these things, but I guess it's a sort of every trick in the book type thing. It was a song that went through so many different styles, from Scottish plain song to something that was like Edward Elgar, Pomp and Circumstance,
right.
Land of Hope and Glory, all that stuff, and then it goes into fusion, but it's got an aspect of, there's a bit of Mozart in there, the vibe of that, and there's a little bit Prokofiev, and it's a little bit this, and it's a very much a mongrel from a number of these different schools and parts. It's pan-genre, it goes through all those changes. So I kind of did the same with the guitar solo there, and right at the end of the song, it's got the quietest jam imaginable by a rock band, a jam, but it's all very quiet. It's a little bit like jazz.
Yeah, okay. Now I am familiar with some of your influences. Now, that being said, when you start getting into some of these styles and methods that you use for playing yourself, did you ever have any thought in your mind that, this might be something that could be a bit of a trailblazing type of thing, that you'd be a trendsetter, that other guitarists would be kind of looking at that like, oh, yeah, I could do so much more if I would just do this, that, and the other thing. Was it something that for you, was just natural, I guess, obviously, but...
Well, it was something that, I remember that we were, the band at the time, Phil, to quote him again, was listening to Mahavishnu Orchestra because he was so impressed with, I think, Billy Cobham, and, like John McLaughlin's very, very fast but rhythmic style. And I think there was something about that. So when I was doing the tapping thing, it enabled you to play very fast on one string. So I was doing that in 1971, Nursery Crime, then on Foxtrot, and then on Selling England.
Right.
So for a short while there, we were able to do something that what was later to become fusion. should we say, the similarities with that. That thing about being the fastest gun in the West. If you can achieve that for 5 seconds, but it isn't all about that for me. I think
Sure.
otherwise, if it's all about speed for you as a guitarist, then it's a little bit like sport. Where does sport end and music start? Or really, should you be doing that, trying to shave nanoseconds off that stuff?
Right.
It can be very impressive, but very wearing for the audience. So.
Right. Well, getting back to your point about how much you can do with just 3 chords, at the same time, it's amazing though how, again, it has become a standard for like the shredders of today. When you talk about like speed metal and everything like that, I mean, it's like if you can't do that, then you shouldn't be playing at all. Really, I mean, that's like the standard. That's like entry level stuff that was at the time cutting edge.
Somebody said. A great friend of mine, a violinist who's a fabulous player, Christopher Warren Green. He said all a virtuoso is someone who can string a whole bunch of tricks together. And then I've got a quote, Henry Miller, the writer, saying, talking about another writer. He said it's almost as if everything is learned from other people. He said it's the difference between a virtuoso and a composer. So I always think in mind, think of Bach. You think, the great virtuosic pieces.
Sure.
Phenomenally fast, phenomenally difficult. All the rest, people can spend a lifetime trying to get that stuff together. But then there's also the simplicity of a beautiful melody. And, guys like that realize the difference, that to be able to contrast salvos with a beautiful, slow melody. So for me, I think it's all really about contrasts, really.
Okay.
There's no point being in one gear the whole time. I don't think so, but maybe another genre would say, yeah, but that's our whole raison d'etre. That's what speed metal's all about. Fine, but for anyone who wants to not invest their whole life in speed and technique, there are other avenues. Everything the Beatles did, flies in the face of that. So, and the Stones.
Right.
So, sometimes it's important to work with the groove.
You've got a lot of knowledge here, Mr. Stephen Hackett. Now, over the years, obviously, you're going to acquire that, especially with all of your experience. But it sounds to me like you're someone who would have written a book or 2 by now.
I should have done, but that's yet to come, isn't it? I don't want to be. I'm self-taught. So, autodidactics, beware. But I don't actually have a lot of theory, but I do have a lot of experience. And you might say that I never really did it properly. I never did it thoroughly. I always wanted to run before I could walk.
Okay.
So I didn't learn to read music, although we were all taught music when we were at school. I could write it down parrot fashion. But for me, I do write things down. I've got my own notation because my memory is poor these days. I don't remember the things that I write. Well, you've got over 20-some albums and everything. You've probably forgotten more than most people have ever created, I would imagine. Yeah, I heard the expression noisiness of channel. That's the thing, redundancy of information compensates for noisiness of channel. So when you're on overload the whole time, you're not necessarily going to remember things. So yeah, I figured the best way to do it is to write it down. I prefer to do that than record into something. I like to see it on the page. It's there. Well, you just have such a rich history, and just your philosophy of playing the guitar in general, let alone the stories on the road and your time with Genesis and your solo career, but just your philosophy about playing the guitar in general. I think that would be so, inspiring to a lot of upcoming musicians and artists, because we know full well, there's guys like Eddie Van Halen out there and Malmsteen that have particularly cited you, as kind of an influence on how they play and what they do. Been very lucky that have been a number of people who spoke very kindly about the influence. That can be that's something interesting. I've worked with guys who've said, I influenced them, and and all of that. But a number of those people have done fantastic work, and so I think it's okay to be influenced, particularly as a songwriter.
Right.
We all suffer from the anxiety of influence. You think, oh, he's done that, why should I do that? No, you think it's what you do with it yourself.
Right.
So all of us add a footnote compared to what Bach did.
Sure.
Jack Bruce would say, did say that his favourite bass player was Bach. So,
Wow.
but
yeah.
I doubt if Bach had that voice.
Right. And I didn't know that you sang, myself, until I heard the Night Siren, and But so no, I was just gonna say. So return to Genesis. Let's go back to some of your roots, because obviously, that's where a lot of people know you, and where a lot of people started becoming influenced by your work. Nursery Crime.
Yeah.
You join Genesis.
Yeah.
You come up with Phil Collins and Peter Gabriel and Rutherford, and I mean, wow. Did you ever think at that point in time, did you feel that you were onto something? That did you think in your mind that young that it's like, yeah, we're gonna be legends. We'll be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame someday.
No, I think what happens is, I was very serious, in my young day, and Phil. I'm not sure that the guys in the band realised that Phil had been, a child actor, dancer, singer. He'd been in Oliver. When I first met him, I just thought, well, he's the drummer, okay. He's the guy who probably has to work harder than the rest of us. He's the guy who's in a sweat, putting everything physically into it.
Right.
So no. I when we did that first album together, the first album with that combination of 5 people,
Right.
Nursery Crime, I thought that there were many moments on the album that were really great. Fountain of Salmacis was my favourite, but then I came to realise in time that the musical box was an incredibly beautiful number. So to top and tail the album with the strongest songs, I think was what it was all about. But there's many other things in there that I was very proud of. I loved it. The moment we got a Mellotron, I thought, home and dry. We can now sound enough like an orchestra. We can do that thing that the Moody Blues and King Crimson were able to do. That thing of stretching out into it. It's like having an onboard time machine.
Right.
It can sound ancient. It can sound modern.
Now, the introduction of the Mellotron, would you say that maybe that's one of those things that defined Genesis as a progressive rock band? Would you say that was definitely one of those instruments that...
Yeah, I think that when people think of progressive, they think of they think of the Mellotron, they think of the Hammond organ. The two sort of mainstays of the progressive keyboard player, Tony Banks.
Yes.
And many others, Rick Wakeman. That, and then a couple of years later, from 71 to 73, people are using synthesizers.
Sure.
Maybe they're using monophonic ones, very simple devices. You couldn't play chords on it at that time. But nonetheless, all these things transform the sound of the band, and, what was cutting edge then is not the same as now, of course.
Sure.
Now, you expect a keyboard, you buy a keyboard and you expect to do 1,000 different sounds,
Right.
patch change. Back in the day, you needed to have, the instrument there, like a guitarist still does in a way.
Right.
If you wanted to make a different sound, you've got to pick up a different axe.
Yeah, it's amazing how far you really all were, ahead of your time. I just remember the first time that I ever heard Genesis, and it's actually kind of funny, because when I was a kid, growing up, I remember the first time I heard Genesis, I thought Invisible Touch was the very first Genesis album ever. I had to go back in time.
And no reason why not, yeah.
But, I mean, it's just amazing to see the growth, and in that time, because obviously you had Foxtrot, and you had Selling England by the Pound. Did you have a favorite from the 70s, that time you were with Genesis?
Well, I thought Selling England had something that no other band had at that time. There was something, yes, it was very English, but somehow the title of it and the fact that perhaps it entitled us to be idiosyncratic. It allowed us to be crazy, but be cohesively crazy, perhaps.
Okay. Now, I have to ask you, when you were making that music, obviously Peter Gabriel was the lead singer.
Yeah.
Phil Collins is on drums.
Yeah.
And since that time, everyone had gone off into their own solo careers, as you did. You know, I believe that your debut was in 1975.
Yeah.
Did you ever think in your mind that that might be something that could happen? Were you ever thinking as the guitarist of Genesis that, oh, you know, Gabriel's going to go off doing his own thing? Phil Collins, he can actually sing. You know, he's going to go off and do his own thing. And you know what? I always wanted to have my own solo career, so I'm just going to go off and do my own thing too. Was that ever something that dawned on you?
Well, you know what happened? Lamb Lies Down on Broadway was a kind of watershed for the band. Pete actually left the band before we did that and then came back again.
Okay.
Pete was going to go and work with William Friedkin, The Exorcist, you know, the director of that. So Pete was thinking over and above the band, and he said, I'm going to do the album. I'll fulfill all the gig commitments, but then I'm going to leave. And at that time, I thought, well, I better get going with my own stuff. You know,
Okay.
I've held back here. You know, I think that all of us, really, in Genesis, allowed Pete to be the star. We all sat down, and although we all wrote stuff, we were like the pit orchestra. We sat around, and you know, Pete flew around the stage like Nijinsky meets Diaghilev.
He did have a penchant for the theatrics, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all of that, you know. So it's you know, it was a different time. Suddenly, we all really had to come out of ourselves if we were going to survive beyond that.
So would you give Gabriel maybe some credit to really inspiring you to go solo? Would you have thought about going solo if maybe not for that happening?
I think it was a positive outcome from a potentially negative obstacle.
Interesting.
So yeah, I think it made me work much harder. And if you're used to, you know, writing with a band, but you're writing in a team, sometimes it can be very demanding. Composition by committee is very tough. And of course, you don't expect an artist to share a paintbrush, you know.
Sure.
You know, someone painting a picture, but you know that can happen with bands. Shared glories, shared responsibility, but shared frustration, of course, at times. And suddenly, once I turned on the tap, once I was having to come up with a whole album, I was working very much harder. And it's like, perhaps it's allowing yourself for the first time to experience, you know, the joy of not asking permission, but say, yeah, well, we need more from you. Rhetorical conversations, but then was working very closely with my brother and a great team who made that first album, Acolyte. And that was a total joy for me. Once we did that first song, which was a flute solo from my brother.
Voyage of the Acolyte, yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things I thought was very interesting, one, it was a great year out for it. But you brought Rutherford and Collins along with you.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was thinking to myself, knowing that, why was Voyage of the Acolyte not Genesis, and why was that your first solo? Because obviously the only one you were missing was Banks from that project.
Well, it was, you know, what I was allowed to do within the band and what I was allowed to do outside, you know, the context of the band. So it comes down to the issue of autonomy, permission, all of those things. And I don't expect anyone who hasn't been through that to really understand this at that stage. But I have to sort of quote the example of, if you're familiar at all with the Beatles and George Harrison, you know, working with the giants of McCartney, Lennon, and then once Harrison starts to kick in, he's doing arguably the strongest stuff. You know, of all the solo performers,
Mm.
he is the strongest. But obviously, as the youngest or newest member of the team in that band, yeah, being the kid, you know, I was the last person to join that 5-man
So,
lineup.
okay. Mm.
Founder members hold sway. You have to always understand this, you know. So, as in the Beatles, it's Lennon's band. You need
Right.
his permission to do anything, right? The same with Genesis. You know, a school band where they've grown up together. They've
Right.
known each other since they're 11 years old, for God's sake. You
Right.
know?
Right.
So I team up with them. I'm 21. So 10 years later, there's already some considerable history. But I would say for anyone who's trying to form their own band and finding it very difficult, sometimes you've got to team up with other guys who might be further along the line. You know, someone who might have, they might have gigs, they might have a recording contract, they may have all of these things. There comes a point where any idealist has got to learn to be a realist and to work with other people.
Right. Right. Now, with a lot of your solo career, I know that you've played, you know, the Return to Genesis. You've played a lot of the original Genesis material. Did you ever get any pushback from any of the guys?
I've never had any comment other than, I think, from Peter Gabriel saying, you know, he was pleased that things had taken off for me doing this. So he's been the most positive. It's a very strange thing with Genesis that privately we often congratulate each other. But it has been known in the ranks of Genesis to publicly denounce, privately congratulate. It's to do with the very competitive nature of, I think, the school system and the fact that the guys that suffered under the lash, you know, all those years ago with that private school system, you know, they were trying to churn out captains of industry and those who, you know, be able to lead a charge in the Crimea without flinching. It produced a certain steely resolve and toughness. But I think that it also can be quite damaging for young, you know, for young minds, all of that. And certainly in Genesis' case, it worked in terms of producing some of the best music I think I've ever heard from a young team of songwriters.
Now, what did you think of the transition from Gabriel to Collins? Did you even know? Did you know Collins could sing?
Yes, I knew he could sing. I encouraged it. He sang lead on one of the tracks on my solo album. And I said, why don't we make Phil the singer? No, disagreement. Went through all of the auditions.
Oh, wow.
Everyone else, and some guys that were very good too.
Anyone that we know from other projects?
You know, I can't remember off the top of my head. But I think that the guy that joined Rainbow was one of those guys that we saw. And I'm sorry if I'm not quoting names here.
Yeah, no.
But we went through a whole ton of people, and but in the end of the day, we started recording this album when we didn't really have a singer, and it was up to Phil from one day to the next.
That's amazing. And then we know what happened, you know, after that.
And then it went absolutely mega. But yeah, there was this thing about, you know, singers don't look good singing and drumming at the same time. So once we got through that hurdle, in fact, it was John Anderson at Phil's first wedding who said, "Why don't you make Phil the singer?" And I said, "Well, I agree with you, but I don't think Tony and Mike are going to go for that." But I guess we were proved right.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you knew something after all.
Well, they are. Yeah. It's, you know, one of those
Do you think
things.
you guys? I mean, I know there's been rumors over the years, and everyone wants to talk about it, and that always happens, you know, after a band's been apart for a while. But do you think you guys ever might get back together again?
Well, the short answer is that there are no plans to do that.
Until next week when it comes out in some massive publication, Genesis is getting back together, and you heard it here first.
I only wish I could say that with you, but yeah, you know, it's the big one, isn't it? All of that. But as I say, there are no plans.
Okay.
There are no plans at the moment. I find if I say black, someone else just says blue. So there's no point me suggesting it. It has to be someone else's idea, and then, you know, maybe. But we have to do it all, you know, while everyone's still alive.
Right?
That would be really cool, wouldn't it? You know, posthumously wouldn't really
Be hard to pull off.
quite cut it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But as I say, no plans. So
Okay.
you heard it here, folks.
All right. You heard it here first.
From my lawyer.
All right. So Stephen Hackett's not going to leak anything anywhere else. You know, we're not going to read about this anywhere else.
I try and honour the music. This is my positive. Is I honour the music that we did in the early days. I don't dismiss it.
Right.
You know, there is a school of thought within Genesis, God rest the soul of the band that no longer exists, which decries and denounces the early work and says this is, that was all heresy. You know,
right.
The church started later on, but yeah, I think that it was a perfect model. Much of this early work, and it's the stuff that influences musicians. I've heard a lot of musicians who said they got on board with that. Classical musicians, virtuosos, etc. So I prefer that. You know, if that was the rocket fuel that produced, many a launch pad, if you like, for others, then I'm very proud of that. And as you can see, it goes down a storm in front of audiences. So there's classic Genesis, and there's the other stuff. I won't call it old Genesis.
Right.
It's the classic period.
Well, I can say, as a fan, myself, I mean, it would be wonderful. I mean, I think it would be really, really epic.
Yeah.
And probably wouldn't be too bad on the pockets either, You guys, not that y'all necessarily need the help, but that would be pretty cool. You'd have people coming out of the woodwork just because it's funny. I was at a store the other day, and I was telling people, I'm going to have an interview with Stephen Hackett. Right. And they're like, oh, wow, really? That was Genesis. And I would imagine you're going to have different generations that are going to associate with when Peter Gabriel was the front man versus when Phil Collins was the front man, and everything in between. But if there was some divine intervention, that was able to bring that together, that really would be something magical.
Well, it's been a long time coming. I always say it's possible but improbable.
Sure.
Mind you, I remember John Paul Jones with Zepp said they would never reform, since Bonzo had gone. But,
right.
But they did do it, of course, with Bonzo's son, Jason.
Right.
But it was only for one gig.
Right. Well, you guys are all still together. But I do want to talk about your solo career.
We're all still pals, that's for sure.
You are friends. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. That's cool. So do you have an open line of communication with one another?
Yeah.
Has there ever been any talk about them joining you on your solo projects, on your solo tour?
Well, as I say, publicly denounce, privately congratulate.
Okay, all right.
We've got the competitive spirit there. But I'm not like that, and I've been on stage with Mike and with Pete.
Okay.
And we did have a reunion back in 1982. Several decades ago, of course,
right,
to help Pete. At that time we were struggling, but that was then. Today is today.
Right. Well, now you're playing with GTR music. You're playing Genesis music. With
I honor the history.
Yes. Now with the tour on now, are you also playing anything from the Night Siren as well, since that came out last year? Or? Okay. All right. So
we do most nights. I think we do 3 things from that. So I like to honor that album as well. So it's a difficult choice because the album did very well, the Night Siren. So to do that and also do the Genesis stuff, it's like, what's the greater audience? And so it's always a tricky one. As I say, I tend to do a set of my stuff, then I do a set of the band stuff and a little bit of GTR.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. It's diverse.
Yeah, diversification,
Yeah,
that's it.
I like that. So you did have an official music video, and we touched on this earlier. How do you feel about the relevance of official music videos still to, help market and promote your work?
Well, for me, I think that I did videos pretty early on. Most of them are forgettable, but there's one or two. There's one with Richie Havens. With Richie Havens and I, he's singing a track called "How Can I," off of "Please Don't Touch," which has got its 40th anniversary this year. Okay. That's a nice video. And then there's all the rest, which are pretty forgettable. Although they're up there, a lot of these things are live things. What's the difference between a live show, which is a video after all, or that kind of miming thing.
Right.
But I think the video that went with Behind the Smoke is probably the best I've done, the most elaborate. But then it also had a message about refugees.
Right.
It was basically a song of peace and the idea of tolerance and the idea that refugees are not just a current day problem, economic migrants and all that, people leaving war-torn regions, but over 100 years ago, my family on my mother's side were Jewish people coming out of Poland, pogroms, where I had stories of women being dragged along by their hair.
Oh my gosh!
And you think, yes, it's time to leave, isn't it? So to honour the ancestors, I think I did that song, and I think there needs to be respect for those who have been. It's a bit like, would you kick someone who's dying in the gutter in the first place? Would you kick a dog? Would you, would you do that? And that's what's going on politically. So I have to say, I'm ashamed of the way a lot of the world is behaving. The fact that it can't assimilate anymore. A lot of problems that were started by going into their countries and ruining the infrastructure. So I think that the shoulders have got to be broad enough in order to be able to assimilate, because otherwise you're just exacerbating the problem.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, do you feel that your platform, as a musician, it's important to incorporate these social issues?
I think so. I think that back in the day, we had Bob Dylan, we had Buffy St. Marie, Neil Young. We had people that would talk about issues. This goes back further, of course, but I think it's important to do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
If you've got a platform, you might as well use it. We can't all be going and do what we do. Listen to my latest glorious hit. I think if you've got the world's ear, you might as well just say it like it is.
Put an important message in there.
Without that, American boys would still be dying in Vietnam if certain people didn't stand up and say, yeah, this is wrong. You can't go about with your head buried in the sand. If you feel strongly about an issue, you've got to do something about it. You've got to say something. Sometimes you've got to be unpopular to be popular. Eventually people will say, oh yeah, you were right with that. Maybe we shouldn't have gone blasting.
Right on.
Yeah.
So, the remainder of your tour, where are we headed next? Right now, obviously, we're in the city of brotherly love, playing just over the river. That's here right. In New Jersey.
Where do we go next?
Where do we go?
Well, we do the West Coast. We do some stuff over there. We go to South America. Yeah, we've done Canada. We've done the cruise to the edge once again. Then we get to go back home after doing a whole ton of South American countries.
Where's the best place for everybody to go to check out the remaining tour and everything else that you have going on?
Oh, tonight's show, of course.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah.
This is it. This is
at the Scottish Rite. Yeah.
Okay.
Check that out.
All right.
That'll be fun.
Right.
But then we go back home for a couple of weeks. Then we have Japan.
Okay.
Later in the year.
Well, we're reaching out to our worldwide audience.
We
here.
are.
So,
well, that's right.
people can get a plane ticket.
Later in the year.
Head over to Japan.
Yeah, over to Japan. Then later in the year, we do some dates with the orchestra in the UK.
Okay. All right. I've always wanted to go over there. Never been.
Yeah.
That'd be a good excuse.
American conductor, English orchestra, English rock band. Looking forward to working with Brad Thatchuk. Loved working with him in Buffalo with the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra, so we're going to do it again.
Nice.
And so rock and orchestras are coming closer together. I always wanted Genesis to become an orchestra, to do what the Beatles did, to do what ELO did, to do what Procol Harum did. But sometimes it's been rock, sometimes it's been shape-shifting into other genres. It hasn't always been rock. Sometimes it's been classical stuff. But sometimes you've got to just down tools and embrace the old instruments.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you brought that up.
Yeah.
It's interesting you brought that up just because we recently covered Leslie Mondoki and the Mondoki Soulmates.
Great.
And, I know he's from over in Hungary, and you'd worked on the project there.
Yeah, so. I think, ever since the Beatles did Eleanor Rigby, that was, suddenly, transformative, all that stuff. To be able to tell the story. Sometimes you need the old instruments to do that. But the mixture of the two, I still think is mighty if you can get it.
The rock and the orchestral. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, everybody, I'm here with Stephen Hackett, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, original Genesis member, and now on tour with his solo project. And everybody, go check him out online. Stephen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you.
Yes,
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right.
Thanks again for watching. Please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also catch us at www.rocktitan.tv.